Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. From snowy Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and the palatial FYC studio, you're listening to For Your Consideration,
the podcast featuring roundtable discussion reevaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics.
I'm your host, Mike.
And I'm Dustin.
And hello to all our listeners who are catching the show on YouTube or iHeartRadio, Stitcher, possibly Google Play, and wherever great pods are cast.
Does that mean the ocean as well for the dolphin pods?
Very possibly. Very possibly. Also, if you're listening to the show on iTunes, we would really like it if, while you're there, you rated and reviewed the show. Because that stuff helps. We can't pay you or anything, but...
maybe we can be paid one day. In something other than your adulation.
A person can dream.
Or they could have nightmares.
Thanks so much for joining us this week. Once again, we had a listener poll. The two choices were the 1954 Japanese film Gojira, known as Godzilla here in North America, and the other one was Ed Wood's Plan 9 from Outer Space, which I believe was a 1958 film. You guys, you let your voices be heard, and the winner with a 75% to 25% ratio was 1954's Gojira.
AKA that movie that shows us just how much of a fashion faux pas wearing sunglasses over an eye patch is. It is a terrible faux pas. Not even I would do it.
Alright, let's roll the credits on this movie before we get to discussing it. So, Godzilla was directed by Ishiro Honda. It was produced by Tomoyuki Tanaka. Screenplay was by Takeo Murata and Ishiro Honda. Story was by Shigeru Kayama. It starred Akira Takarada, Momoko Kochi, Akihiko Kirata, and Takashi Shimura. Music was by Akira Ifukube. Cinematography was by Masao Tamai. Edited by Kazuji Taira. Produced by Toho Company and received a wide release in Japan on November 3rd, 1954. The film was originally not really reviewed that well, but it has aged quite well. It has since gone on to being referred to as one of the top 20 Japanese films of all time.
On Sight and Sound, it is in that illustrious bottom spot of the critics' poll, tied for 894th, and it has spawned a series with 32 movies, not to mention the American movies that have been made, the anime, the fact that it was rebooted 4 times. It will not die.
Much like the Godzilla himself.
In spite of how he was completely dissolved into nothing in this film. Spoiler alert.
I was wrong last time in assuming that that was the first time that you had seen Full Metal Jacket, but I'm not wrong in saying that this is the first time you have seen Gojira.
Not including, of course, either of the newer Gojiras, which are just Godzilla.
And which you can't actually include because they're not this movie.
That is correct. Except for to mention that in all of the remakes, they'd completely wiped the entire slate clean except for this film.
I think in all fairness, if you are going to kind of do that, you have to keep this one intact because this movie was the foundation of everything. And unless you're completely rebooting the concept from scratch like the 98 film made by Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin.
Which is pretty much the only one that nobody considers. But otherwise, yeah, they could have remade this film. Nobody ever really has. They're like, no, this film stays. This one sticks. We're going to build off of this one. Even the 2014 one builds off of this one.
That it does. So what did you think of it on your first viewing? Oh, actually, before you do that, we just want to qualify that we had a couple of choices on which format and which version kind of to watch. I have both the Toho Master Collection released by Classics Media and the Criterion Edition of Godzilla. We chose the Criterion Edition partially for the fact that it is completely unedited, including the Coast Guard title card at the beginning, and it had a new, possibly improved English subtitle translation. It's been a while since I watched my Master Collection version, so I don't know just how different they are, but
it also lacks the Raymond Burr that was added on for the American audiences to help Whitey understand.
Well, that goes without saying. And I mean, that was very much, I think, there's a lot of references in this movie to the H-bomb and, never again kind of stuff. When you're talking about stuff that culturally was so impactful and important, and you're trying to sell this movie to the audience that actually perpetrated that thing on you, you'd probably, even though that was the thing that kind of ended the war and the Americans felt very justified in doing it at the time, I think it was just an emotional, political, it was like a thing that they just didn't want to get into. It's like, we just want a monster movie.
And so they cut 30 minutes of it out.
And added Raymond Burr.
And added in Raymond Burr to explain stuff. He was the Morgan Freeman of their time.
In all fairness, the 56 version, it's watchable. It's entertaining. It's a fun monster movie. But Gojira, the 54 Japanese version, the uncut Ishiro Honda version, it's just got so much more going on. I mean, the commentary in this film, it's actually kind of a dark, morose movie. It's not a fun... I mean, it's kind of fun, but it's not like a super fun stomping around, fighting other alien creatures and stuff. There's some real human devastation going on here.
That's actually one of the things that I really loved about this compared to so many disaster movies that you see, especially nowadays. Like the radio announcer who is up on the tower when Godzilla comes there, and he's like, "Oh crap, he's got the tower. We're gonna die now.
This is
Bye."
it, folks. Goodbye.
And they fall down, and they actually had little models falling down too. It's like, we're not half-assing this. People are dying here. They have the hospitals where children are crying over the corpses of their parents. They're not going easy on you.
I love the scene where the doctor or scientist holds the Geiger counter to the little girl, and it's just going like she's completely irradiated. I was like, this is a disaster movie. This is super dark.
The thing is, when a disaster movie happens nowadays, it's like, okay, here's all of New York getting destroyed. It's a good thing nobody happened to be in any of the buildings.
Yeah.
So property is destroyed, but...
Even in the 98 version, there's a huge evacuation of Manhattan to minimize the human deaths.
Whereas here, when they were talking about evacuation, there's some people who are like, no, I already had to go through that once with Nagasaki. Screw that. Until, of course, Godzilla does go through, and then they're all screwed up. And it's that devastation which leads the scientist character to allow them to use his new weapon of mass destruction. And that's the big
oxygen destroyer.
Which is so dumb. How the oxygen destroyer manages to somehow just wipe out all your flesh and then destroy your bones too. It's just the way it works. Don't question it.
Yeah, I mean...
Long story short, weapon of mass destruction, despite the fact that it only works on oceans.
As WMDs go, as far as plausibility and whatnot, I mean, we're already dealing with a several 100-foot monster who's...
breathing out a radiation breath.
Who's a holdover from a prehistoric time and who was awoken by our atomic testing.
And who managed to step on and track a trilobite onto the beach without completely obliterating it. If there's anything where you got to suspend your disbelief, it's that right there. But mentioning a radioactive breath, that was actually some really good special effects when it came to the melting of the towers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even too sure how they did that unless they just electrified that metal and it wasn't built for that, and then it just twisted and fell apart.
I think the effects in this movie, the technical achievements, I know a lot of it probably would look silly to a modern audience, but for somebody who's versed, somebody who, is able to contextualize things, this movie rocks effects-wise.
The effort that they put in with the miniatures and water and fire, like you were saying, it's so hard to scale water and fire, but it looks good. You don't see the massive fire on a tiny little
You see like little die-cast car with the with the flames, and it just looks ridiculous. Like, yeah, the scale that they chose for the models, the buildings and the vehicles and stuff, it really worked with the flame and the water with the boats and stuff. It could have looked so much worse.
And it's not to say that some of the models, like you could tell that they were models.
There was that one scene. You were like, okay, no. What was it? The car rolled over or when flying?
Oh, yeah, the car rolled over, and they must have just had it like on a string, and they spun it around. It was way too fast. But they mix it up with like just showing you actual tanks and artillery going around.
Those were remote control tanks.
The actual tanks?
Those weren't actual tanks.
No, like I'm sure that they were driving. There was some actual people driving tanks in some of the scenes. And then remote control.
But yeah, tanks. There was like a lot of scenes where it was just remote control tanks like driving through the model that they built of Tokyo.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But they mixed it up sometimes with some actual like military hardware. And you could tell which was which. But for 54, fantastic.
Not just 54, but 54 Japan, who, the U.S. had been making big special effects movies for at least 20 years by this point, because King Kong was 1930-something. I know we did the movie a number of episodes ago, but I can't remember the date. And this is 54, so... Actually, originally they wanted to do Godzilla as a stop-motion, planning to kind of ape the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and King Kong, but their effects guy was like, yeah, it'll take us 3 years to basically animate this, so that's why they went with the guy in the suit. But this, the Japanese film industry... I don't want to say it wasn't as sophisticated necessarily, but they didn't necessarily make. This was the first giant monster movie that they made. So the fact that this was kind of the first outing, and this is how good it looked with the resources they had, and then the technical expertise and whatnot. I don't know. Am I putting my foot in my mouth here? Am I? I'm saying that Hollywood was more adept at making movies like this, and the fact that this looks as good as it does and plays as good as it does is a tribute to the filmmakers.
They did a fantastic job, which makes some of the weird bad cuts a little more egregious. There's one scene where Emiko, she stands up and then stands up again immediately afterwards. And it's not like it was a long scene beforehand where she stood up. They pretty much cut to her standing up and then standing up again. I have no idea why they did that. It seems really odd.
To be fair, that could be...
part of the restoration?
Yeah, I believe the film has been restored from like an original negative, or at least some original film sources. That might not have actually been, in the 54 version. That might just be what we're left with. So when stuff like that happens in a really old movie, I try and just ignore it, unless it seems like it's the result of bad filmmaking.
It can be hard to tell, certainly, because, of course, stuff isn't going to age well. Back in the day, they didn't even necessarily record stuff or plan on showing stuff repeatedly. Archiving wasn't exactly top priority.
Well, there are scenes that were shot for the film. It's believed that there are flashback scenes between Emiko and Serizawa before he lost the eye. There's some debate as to whether these were just like still photographs of auditions or still photographs of scenes that were shot that no longer exist, because when you shot something and didn't use it, the negatives were destroyed. They didn't save that stuff. It's like the old Doctor Who episodes, the BBC stuff that was shot on tape, and then when they shot another show, they would just tape over it.
Which is also what they did with so many shows in America. It's why you can't find so many old series, old serials. It's just once and done. Because they didn't have VCRs. They weren't going to rebroadcast anything. It's probably different with movies, because of course they had to ship that out, but...
Well, even films. Most films, nobody expected anyone to watch them again. They were expected to go out there, make their money, and then no one would ever see them again.
How could you? People didn't have the technology for it yet. VCRs didn't exist.
The only ways films were rerun was if a studio re-released the movie, or if theaters that had existing prints of the film, like art house theaters and revival theaters, if they had these existing prints that they would locate or have, and they would play the movie. There was no VCRs, there was no DVD, there was no streaming, so...
Getting back to the actual film, I can't help but express how much I loved the dark feel of the film. The tension that Serizawa has trying to figure out what he's going to do with this discovery of his, because he's seen what happened with the A-bomb, with the H-bomb, and he doesn't want to be the next guy to do this. Which is why when he said that, no, like, if anyone catches wind of this weapon, they're going to get it from me. They're going to convince me one way or another. I'm going to be coerced. So at that point, I knew he was going to kill himself. Like, that's definitely a trope, which is pretty obvious. But there's a lot of tension there, and it wasn't until he saw that choir of, 400,000 women all singing in unison in that church? Something like that? And seeing all the destruction, that he was like, no, I actually have to use it. This is a good thing to do. Which is, to an extent, why the A-bomb was dropped on them in the first place.
I also think it's important to note that this movie is impactful for audiences other than Japanese audiences, which is really great considering how much more impactful this movie would be for actual Japanese audiences. Like the opening scene where the boat gets sunk, that was kind of referencing something that actually happened in history when the Americans tested an H-bomb.
On the Bikini Atoll?
On the Bikini Atoll, and the Lucky Dragon was the boat that nobody knew was out there, the fisherman boat. That was a callback to that. And when Godzilla is tramping through Tokyo, he destroys that clock tower, which is like it's a well-known landmark, and he trashes like some government building, and he trashes what's essentially their equivalent to the Radio City Music Hall.
Basically went all Independence Day on the national monuments.
So this is a movie coming out 9 years after August of 1945. You know, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are probably still pretty fresh considering the content and the theme of this film.
Most everyone would have lived through that in Japan at this point.
And then you're seeing Tokyo being decimated and seeing these monuments and landmarks that are familiar and like Tokyo aflame. And so it's probably pretty profound to be watching this and to be Japanese. But the fact that it leaps that cultural boundary and is just as impactful, even if you don't have those connections to those things, I think that really says something about this movie.
And even on a more simple story writing perspective, the way they set everything up in the beginning, the old guy talking about the old history and just giving him a random name from folklore, the way it's set up has a fair bit of impact, and it doesn't go drama, it goes sort of real. I enjoy the storytelling method where it's not following an individual story. It just goes from sort of scene to scene, showing you what's important and how it's affecting the people involved.
You saw news sources, you saw government council meetings, you saw people reacting on the train.
People getting rescued only to be lost again because it's one ship goes down, we don't know what happened. Oh, there's another ship in the vicinity. Shit, that ship's gone down. Okay, we got some survivors. Fishing boat picked them up. You're not going to believe this nonsense. Fishing boat's gone. What's going on here?
Send more boats. Nah. It does have a nice slow build to it. It does have that, you know, Godzilla doesn't just show up and start trashing things. You kind of get to experience it.
And it doesn't also start with, okay, here's the relationship that you have between Ogata and Emiko. That it does happen, but it's sort of sidelined, and it's not the first thing you see. It's not the important part of the movie. Heck, they don't even get around to mentioning that they're going to be getting together. It's just something that's sort of happening in their lives at the same time. Whereas a lot of other movies, you watch a Roland Emmerich movie, and it's going to be all about these are the two people trying to get together, and Godzilla's sort of in the background, if anything.
I really liked the way that romantic subplot played out because Ogata and Emiko were kind of like, yeah, we want to be together. She's sort of betrothed to Serizawa, but Serizawa's all wrapped up in his own scientific stuff, so he's not even really... It's kind of a non-starter, and I think both Emiko and Serizawa know it, and Ogata is about to ask Yamane, her father, for permission to take her hand, and then they have a disagreement over how to deal with Godzilla. Yamane wants to study Godzilla, he wants to destroy Godzilla, and he's like, get out of my house! So then they can't advance with the romance, but then later when Emiko, Ogata, and Serizawa are talking about the oxygen destroyer, and Serizawa starts destroying his work. You can see in Emiko's face how much she actually cares for him. It doesn't have to be said. It doesn't have to be spoon-fed to you. She's feeling an incredible amount of affection and appreciation for what he is doing, and I think she might even know inside that, this could be it for this guy. And then he does his big sacrifice at the end, and Ogata and Emiko can kind of be together because he sort of said, I hope you two are going to be happy before he sacrifices himself.
He knew, and he gave them his blessing before he went. And their romance was always... It wasn't at the forefront of the story.
Exactly.
The tension that was going on was often directly connected to the actual action with Godzilla. He wasn't able to be with her for a certain time because he had to go and rescue these ships. And she's like, oh, okay, like, work is work. You got to deal with that. Serizawa, he's fighting over his work. Like, his work is all-encompassing to him. The other drama, it all gets dropped behind and put to the wayside when Godzilla's involved. Godzilla comes out, and everybody's like, all our other nonsense is kind of unimportant right now. We got to focus on Godzilla. In the middle of an attack, they never start talking about their relationship. The relationship never comes up. It's only during the calm that they even bother dealing with it, and it's never the most important thing. It's like, I couldn't get around to talking to Serizawa about us. I couldn't get around to...
And that doesn't become an issue between them. It's not like, how could you not, don't you care for me? It's like, oh, I totally get it, because all this stuff going on.
It might be the end of the world. Like, we don't know right now. Everything could be ending. This can wait.
So that relationship is there, and it adds color, and it adds texture, but it doesn't ever subvert the theme of the movie. It doesn't ever subvert the fun of having this crazy kaiju running around.
It just makes it more real because you've got characters who have other shit going on that is getting put to the wayside.
And in any disaster movie, you have to, obviously, either the monster or the natural disaster, whatever it happens to be, is going to be the focal point of the film, but you need to have characters to sort of latch onto. So they need to have some kind of internal, struggle or something going on.
But it's nice to not have them like in the middle of the action where the woman's hanging from a building that's falling as Godzilla's walking by, and the guy's got to run up and be like, no, grab onto my arm, I'll save you if it's the last thing I do. I swore to your dad.
They didn't milk it.
They did not milk it. They weren't even near the action. They sort of saw it off in the distance at most at any point in time.
If the writers were Luke Skywalker and the story was a weird alien with an udder sticking out...
I'm not too sure where you're going with this.
They turned around and walked away. They didn't milk it. So we've discussed effects, we've discussed story, we've discussed cultural impact. The music really fits, I think, the story, but it's kind of there. It's not amazing, but it's not bad.
The one sound that always sticks out in my mind is Godzilla's roar, because especially at the beginning when they have just the title credits, they have him roaring a whole lot, and I'm like, what the heck is this sound even supposed to be?
I love Godzilla's roar. I just love it. It's such a signature thing. And that's actually one of the things, if I'm going to point out something kind of exceptional or really well done about the music, the way that they incorporate sort of the Godzilla sounds with the underscore. They've got that constant thumping when Godzilla's around, which I believe is supposed to sort of represent his footsteps and the impending doom, and his roar has kind of a musical horn-like quality to it, which goes really well with the music. And really, there isn't much music in the movie unless Godzilla's around. It's usually in the Godzilla moments when the music comes in. In the quiet moments, there isn't really a lot of orchestration.
Whereas during the Godzilla moments, there's also no dialogue. It's just he's going around trashing stuff. People might be freaking out, giving a few commands here and there, but even something like, guys, we can't stop Godzilla. None of this is working. Just start rescuing people. And then Godzilla will come in, vaporize the car that somebody's obviously in, and goes off and destroys some more stuff. And during that time, you'll have the music going on. It's almost sort of a separation between the different parts of the movie, the drama and the action. I know you were mentioning how a lot of the people weren't really reacting a whole heck of a lot given the scale and the disaster.
There was kind of a shell shock. I mean, the movie it's got some very rapid editing. They cut to a lot of different things in a very quick fashion, but the movie never feels rushed. This is like a 93 or 98 minute movie, and it feels longer, and not in a bad way. It feels denser, and it feels like it unravels sort of slowly. It's a slow build until sort of the shit hits the fan.
It feels longer, but it doesn't feel like, man, would this ever just hurry up?
Yeah, exactly. And over the course of this runtime, Godzilla is making things happen. There's the boats that are sinking, and then there's the time that he freaks out the village on the island, and then there's the time where he just sort of does that first stroll across the coast. They try to electrocute him, and then he basically comes and he trashes central Tokyo. And through that whole thing, you don't see a lot of panic. They don't portray the people in, mass hysteria. They're more shell-shocked than anything else.
The only time they're really shouting and running is when he is right there.
And there's kind of a dialogue going on between a number of people where it's like, do we study Godzilla or do we kill Godzilla? But yeah, oddly enough, it's not a tension-filled movie, if you know what I mean.
And at the same time, like, they've just recently gone through World War II. They've experienced so much worse. At this point, it's like, really? This again? More of this nonsense?
I think that's probably the best explanation, like,
but
shell
even
shock.
But also on the island, I really liked the reactions there. When Godzilla's around, they flee. But then he starts to leave, and they start following him again, trying to figure out what the heck's this thing that we just saw.
Well, they're curious. They want to see it, but yeah, they're also afraid for their lives.
It's almost like a little kitten, almost. Run away. Come back up, start sniffing around. What's going on over here?
So I think I pretty much said everything I need to say. If there's anything you want to add?
I would say it's time to start voting.
All right.
And when it comes to disaster films, monster films, kaiju films, just like the fact that this is the one movie that will not be removed from the canon of Godzilla, I don't think it should be removed from the canon of disaster films. It does what it meant to do 50, 60, 64 years later. It still has impact, and it still stands head and shoulders above a lot of our disaster films, which are just action cash grabs, I guess, compared to this. This actually was saying something, had some emotional impact, and is, even today, somewhat relevant, given that it's talking about weapons of mass destruction as opposed to specifically atom bombs, just the destruction that we can wrought and the consequences thereof. This is a film that has stood the test of time and will continue to do so. I would say masterpiece for this guy.
And I'm also going to go masterpiece because this is an important movie. I think it deals with important themes. I think on a lot of levels, this was a group of filmmakers who were telling a story that if they tried to tell it in a straightforward, traditional way, probably would have been shut down. They told it in kind of an interesting sci-fi, fable-like way and did a wonderful job of it, and it got around the world. And it turned into something cartoonish as things went on.
And then it got serious again. And then it went cartoony. And then it got serious.
But yeah, this film, it's a technical achievement. It's still entertaining to watch. It has great acting. It's well shot.
And it has a lot of balls.
I want to make a joke about how you can't actually see Godzilla's balls, but...
Well, could be like the Emmerich version. Maybe it's a she.
Good point. I'm not sure where I left off, so...
I believe we were talking about Godzilla's balls.
We were. Yeah, it's got balls. And...
And I invite you guys to check out Godzilla's balls as well.
Yeah, if you haven't seen this movie, definitely check it out. And after you check out this movie, you can either check out Godzilla 84 or Godzilla 2014, because 84 is the Japanese direct sequel to it, and the 2014 Gareth Edwards version is kind of the American direct sequel to it.
Which is followed by Kong Skull Island, which will be followed by Godzilla King of Monsters again.
King of Monsters, yeah.
And then Kong vs. Godzilla, so a lot of sort of remakes of the old stories. But it's still going strong. They even have an anime series. The first one came out last year, and you got 2 more on the way.
So we'd be curious to know what you guys think of the movie and what you thought of our discussion on this episode. Give us a shout on our YouTube comment threads, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I've started posting Instagram stories, so if you check out our Instagram, check that out. We also have the WordPress blog, which we've started adding content to, which we hadn't for a while, but that's kind of started up again. And there's always the Patreon campaign. If you like the show, one of the ways you can support the show is to do so financially. We've got some interesting reward tiers there. Give what you can, helps keeps the lights on, and helps us develop the podcast into something better.
And otherwise, we hope you can join us again next week when we will be looking at Birth. I got to choose the last film arbitrarily, and this is Mike's turn.
I believe Birth is 2004. It's a Jonathan Glazer film, and it was super controversial when it came out, and has one of the best opening scenes, I think, in cinema history.
Now you know I'm going to hate that opening scene, because I'm going to be expecting too much.
So thanks so much for listening. We look forward to seeing you next week on For Your Consideration.
I've been your host, Dustin.
And I've been your host, Mike.
Until next time.
Take care.
Ta-ta. Why the fuck can't I remember anyone's name? Suzu. Sarazawa? I can't do it today. For some reason.